Hello, today I'm working on my wife's Vauxhall Mokka. What I'm doing is changing the front lower suspension wishbone. I'm replacing this wishbone because the cover on the ball joint is split. The split was spotted on the last MOT and was put down as an advisory to be repaired immediately. I start by slightly loosening the wheel nuts. I then jack the wheel up off the ground and remove the wheel nuts and take the wheel out of the way. When the wheel is out of the way, I put a jack stand under the vehicle just to be safe. I then give all the nuts and bolts that I'm going to be working on a spray with WD-40. The first thing I'm going to do is detach the ball joint from the wheel. I do this by removing the nut and bolt that are holding the ball joint in place through a type of clamp. The bolt passes through a partially machined groove in the ball joint itself, which I might show later. The nut and bolt come undone quite easily, and then I just push the bolt out with a punch. The ball joint itself isn't that difficult to remove from the wheel. The only way I can do it is by just knocking down the suspension arm from above with a blunt instrument. When the ball joint is disconnected from the wheel, I can swing the wheel back a little bit, and that allows me more access to the two bolts that I've got to undo to remove the actual wishbone. Next, I loosen the nut and bolt on the right hand side of the wishbone. I do this with an 18mm socket and a ring spanner, and I basically just loosen it by hitting the ring spanner with a hammer. I'm wearing protective glasses all the time. When the right hand nut and bolt are undone, I then turn my attention to the left hand nut and bolt. Access to the left hand nut and bolt is a little bit limited, to say the least. I just had to persevere with the tools I had at hand. The one saving grace is that the nut has a kind of locking tab on it which prevents it from spinning. When both nuts are removed, the bolts come out relatively easy, and that then releases the whole wishbone. Here I'm just double checking that I've ordered the correct part, and I'm happy that I have. Here I'm showing the split cover or gaiter or whatever it might be called, and as you can see there's a bit of rust in there. Here I'm just going to spray some of the area with some rust proofing material just to be cautious. Before starting the reassembly, I just apply anti-seize copper grease to the nuts and bolts. In fact, I like to apply this anti-seize copper grease to everything as I assemble it. So refitting the suspension arm is pretty straightforward, just the 2 bolts with the nuts and tighten up. With the basic tools that I've got, the left hand bolt is a little bit awkward to do up, but with perseverance I just carry on and get it tight. The tab on the nut really helps. I use an 18mm socket and spanner for doing these bolts up. To do the pin up on the ball joint, it requires a 15mm spanner and socket. Next, I've got to attach the wishbone to the wheel. At this point I realise I shouldn't have tightened the wishbone up all of the way. So I loosen the right hand nut so that the wishbone will move a little bit more freely. Initially it's a little bit awkward lining the wishbone and the wheel up together. So I use a small hydraulic jack just to hold the wishbone in place while I manipulate the wheel. When I get them lined up, I give the wishbone a few taps with a hammer, and as you can see it slides into the wheel quite easily. Once I'm happy that the two are attached together and the ball joint is inserted far enough into the wheel, I then try to get the pin in. Once again, the pin has got to be partially through this groove that's in the neck of the ball joint, as it were. Once again, a few light taps with the hammer helps me get the job done. I make sure that the pin is fully engaged with the groove in the ball joint before I finish it off by driving it home with a punch. If you haven't already, I wonder if you'd consider subscribing. It is free and it helps give incentive to create more content. Thank you. So there it is. Just for the sake of a split cover, I've replaced the lower wishbone suspension arm and ball joint. The cost of the front lower suspension wishbone and ball joint was £45 approximately from Amazon. Thank you for watching, and I thank you for your subscription.